Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Melrose Public Schools Kindergarten Registration presentation. This presentation is designed for parents and caregivers who have incoming kindergartners. If you can believe it, these incoming kindergartners will be the class of 2035, and we are so excited to meet all of your students. I want to just remind everyone that this presentation is being recorded tonight, and we will post it on our website. We'll also post the slide deck for review, and it'll likely be shared in the comments toward the end of the presentation, so families can come back and refer to and spend more time looking at the slides later on. Several questions were submitted in advance. Thank you for that. We will have an opportunity to answer some of the pre-submitted questions at the end of the presentation, and we'll also open the comment feature at the end of the presentation so we can answer any questions that might come up from the presentation. However, during the presentation, we will not be monitoring the chat. So if you put a question in the chat, just know that we'll get to it at the end of the presentation. I want to start by introducing our team. I'm Dr. Julie Kuchenberger. I'm your superintendent. And I will let my colleagues go ahead and introduce themselves so you can start to put faces to names, as we'll all be co-presenting this presentation for you tonight.
Hi and welcome. My name is Patty White-Lambright and I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Pupil Personnel Services.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Margaret Adams. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nina Khan Hamza, Principal at Hoover. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Churchill. I'm the principal at the Horace Mann, and I'm delighted to be with you on this exciting evening.
Hi, and welcome. I'm Kristen St. George. I'm the principal at Lincoln Elementary.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm Mary Beth Moranto, and I'm the principal of the Roosevelt School.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to kindergarten. I'm Michael Tracy. I am principal at Winthrop Elementary.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad that you're here with us. I'm Donna Rosso, the principal of the Franklin School.
And behind the scenes is the person that you will likely meet first in person, Brittany Ferguson. She is our registrar, and we just want to thank her publicly before we begin for all of her work and updating our registration process to make sure that it was COVID compliant, and allowing us to get families pre-registered early on so that we can then later on have that in-person final registration process. So we're so excited for your child to be joining us as they begin to embark on their amazing academic career. I am confident, based on my observations in the short time that I've been here as your superintendent, that you are going to have an absolutely phenomenal experience. The educators in the Melrose Public Schools are some of the best, most talented, hardworking educators I've had the pleasure to work with, and I'm so proud to be your superintendent. This year, we have had a lot of changes in our educational programming as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had to implement some changes for our students and our teachers and our families. However, we've also learned so much about our resilience and what we're capable of achieving when we're faced with a challenge of this magnitude. As we're talking with you tonight, you're going to hear us say a lot of phrases like "at this time" and "it depends," and "based on what we know today," or "in a typical year," or "in years past." And we say all of those things because we're learning new information still every day as we follow guidance both from our local Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and the National Center for Disease Control. We are constantly updating our protocols and strategizing to both ensure that we're offering as much access to in-person, live, and synchronous instruction for our students, while also mitigating the risk in trying to minimize transmission of COVID in our schools. Although we might not be able to answer every single question you have at this moment, because things are ever evolving and changing, we want you to be confident that we will continue to communicate with you along the way. And as we learn more, as we develop more plans, we're going to be sharing that information with you. And right now in the district, we're at a point in time when we're preparing our budget for next school year. And as we do that, we're also reflecting on what we've been able to accomplish so far in FY21. That's our current fiscal year. As we think about how these 2 years bridge and intersect with one another, we're really kind of thinking about FY21 or this current school year as our COVID response year, and then thinking forward to what will COVID recovery look like. We don't yet know if masks will still be required next school year. We don't yet know if physical distancing will be required next year or how much space we'll need. We also don't yet know what our enrollment numbers will be. All of these things will really drive our programming and decisions as we think about our COVID recovery plan. And I share that with you now up front because you're going to hear us talk about all of our current available elementary schools. And there is one kind of item still in motion that I just want to make you aware of. We have an additional school in the city of Melrose that's currently being leased by the SEAM Collaborative. It's the BB School. You probably have heard, if you have older students, you've heard the former superintendent and the leadership team alongside the school committee talking about the potential of opening up the BB School to create more space for us and to open up more classroom and learning spaces in this city. That is something that is still possible. We won't know yet if that is a space we will need next year until we have kindergarten pre-registration numbers. That's a big piece of the puzzle. And then we're also looking at how many students who unenrolled from the Melrose Public Schools this year for a variety of reasons might re-enroll. So we just want to put that out there, that that's a possibility. It's something that we are assessing as we look at enrollment needs and space needs for the upcoming school year. And with that, I will turn it over to Patty White-Lambright.
Good evening. I'm going to share a little bit of information with you about our elementary schools. And before I start, I'd like to just share with you, lots of times we have questions about this school, what's different here, what's happening at this school. And for those of you who are familiar with the Melrose Public Schools, and for those of you who this is your first child coming, I just want to impress upon you how we try to work as a team collaboratively across the entire district. And we really strive for consistency in practice and curriculum across all of our buildings. So I'm going to share a little bit of information with you so that you just have a sense, if you're not familiar with the buildings at all, again, who the principal is and what our size is looking like. So the Franklin School, Donna Rosso is the principal there. And as Dr. Kuchenberger was just mentioning, when I was thinking about this presentation, I wanted to give you two sets of numbers so that you would have an understanding of kind of that size of the building. So currently at the Franklin, there's 176 students because we do have students who are going to our preschool there this year, again, smaller numbers. In comparison, last June, even though we were closed for the springtime, the enrollment for the Franklin last year was 325 students, okay? So the next school is the Hoover School, and Dr. Nina Cullen-Hamza is the principal there. She has joined us this year. It's her first year as principal here in Melrose, and we're so thrilled to have her. It's been an exciting year of getting to know the community in an unusual circumstance, but she's done a fabulous job. Currently, the enrollment at the Hoover School is 301. In comparison, last June, the enrollment there was 320 students. The Horace Mann School has Melissa Churchill as principal. Ms. Churchill is the principal there. This is her first year, although she is very familiar with the Melrose Public Schools and had been a classroom teacher, actually a kindergarten teacher for many years. So we're very excited to have her as the principal of the Horace Mann. The Horace Mann is our smallest school. So this year, the current enrollment is 269. Last June, it was 282. So that is our smallest school out of all of them. The next school is the Lincoln School, and Kristen St. George is the principal. Kristen has been here for 3 years with us, and it's a very exciting building. Currently, again, the enrollment is 392. In comparison, last June, the enrollment was 421. So the Lincoln School is one of our larger buildings. And in addition to Ms. St. George, it's supported by an assistant principal, Carol Weldon. One of our other larger schools is the Roosevelt School with Principal Baranto. And I honestly do not remember how long Mary Beth has been with us as a principal, but it's more than 3 years. She's been here for a number of years. And again, this is one of our larger buildings. Currently, the enrollment is 407 students. Last June, it was 437 students. The Winthrop School is under the direction of Dr. Michael Tracy. Dr. Tracy has been with us for 3 years as well. And the current enrollment is 393. And in comparison, last June, it was 421. It's interesting, over the years, we used to just look at Lincoln and Roosevelt as our larger schools, but the Winthrop has really joined those ranks as well. And that is, for those of you who are familiar, we a few years ago did add on some modular classrooms to that building to support the increased enrollment in the district. Okay. So when we start thinking about how we go through this process of registering for kindergarten, the piece I do want to share with you is the school committee's policy around how do we make those assignments to schools. So the school committee does not recognize neighborhood boundaries. So although you might be able to see a school from your front door, we really don't utilize that term as neighborhood schools. So we don't have those neighborhood boundaries. And we do recognize that the buildings are not evenly distributed throughout the district. So for the purposes of figuring out your assignment, you will be asked to give 3 preferences in your rank order for what schools you're looking for that you feel is going to be the best match for your child. So as we start going through that process of actually making school assignments, there are some factors that we need to consider when placing students at certain buildings. So there is consideration if a student with special needs might require a specialized program that is located in one of the buildings, that would be a priority to that placement. If a student required English language services, that too would be a priority for placement in a particular building. We're always wanting to consider equity of class sizes across the building. It's important, if you're able to participate in this process, the timeliness of your registration. Families that move into the district later in the school year will be, their choices will be considered later. So timeliness of going through this process is important. Again, your preference for matches, including if you have a sibling, if your student would have a sibling at that building. That's an important factor that we would consider. And then finally, we also consider the proximity of your home to that school. In addition to all those factors, we also need to keep in mind equity across the buildings in regards to class size, staff load, any contractual agreements, health and safety standards. Okay. So we're going to talk a lot about the school day, but I kind of moved this one slide up to start with after school care, because one of my responsibilities in the district is also coordinating education stations. So for those of you who are familiar with education stations, we do provide after school care and supervision for students at each of the elementary schools. For next year, given, again, at this moment in time, thinking about where we might be, what we are proposing is that we would be running education stations Monday through Thursday with 2 pickup time options, 3:30 and 5:30. So historically, we had provided service for almost 600 families across the district at education stations. This year, we are running education stations, but it's obviously in a much, much smaller format. Thinking to next year, I'm looking forward to a more robust program. And so I am adding in that 3:30 pickup time. Currently, there's only one option of 5:30 pickup time. The actual fees will be determined by school committee, and we will be shifting, well, I think actually for this year, we have shifted the whole process to online sign up, and it will be online payment.
So the Melrose Public Schools for about 4 years has been working toward a vision of personalized learning. And this wheel represents that vision, where we're working toward opportunities in our classrooms that are student-centered. They're based upon standards and providing a progression of working towards those standards. We believe at the heart of our work is relationships with children and building strong social emotional learning skills for students and environments where they can flourish. We use the principles of universal design for learning and thinking about how our classrooms are accessible to all students, and thinking about our environments as flexible in allowing students multiple ways to enter into the learning. So for us, personalized learning includes instruction in standards and as well as social emotional learning skills, and that's an important part of our kindergarten curriculum. We want to create learning environments where a student's individual needs are met throughout the day, where students are working at times together in small groups and on their own, and where we're meeting individual student needs by providing a progression where they're getting working towards specific standards across the content areas, and where learning is transferable. It moves across skills that they learn in one area can also be applied and transferred to other content or other settings and situations.
So the next piece that I would like to share a little bit about has to do with our explicit instruction around social emotional learning. And as you can imagine, for our youngest learners, this is really a significant part of our work with the children. Teaching social emotional learning competencies never ends. These are certainly lifelong skills, but it's very much at the heart of our work with kindergartners. The 5 areas on the wheel highlight the different competencies in which we provide direct instruction in which children practice and develop the skills over the course of all of their years in the schools in Melrose. It's important to remember that we explicitly teach children what's expected, how to practice these skills. For example, when we think of our youngest children and we think about the idea of self-management, you could imagine for a kindergartner that might involve helping children find the right language for their emotions or how they're feeling, and learning to understand what the words are that go with different feelings, because then that can lead to them developing some awareness about themselves, how they manage their big feelings. And in kindergarten, there are a lot of big feelings. There's excitement, there's disappointment, there's frustration as we learn and navigate together, both children working individually, but children working in a school community. As we work with the children in all of our schools, we build on these skills. So for example, understanding your feelings and how you manage them really evolves into older children, perhaps not only managing their feelings with the right strategy for them, but also helps them to begin to know themselves well. That understanding of self-awareness leads to an understanding of themselves as learners and allows them to then make some very good decisions for themselves as learners. And as your child goes through the Melrose schools, this level of independence and giving children voice in their learning is a theme that really carries throughout all of our work. But we start certainly with these 5 areas: self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, and relationship skills and responsible decision-making with our youngest children. And I think everyone here on this presentation would tell you that there's probably nothing more exciting, more fun, and more varied than working with our kindergarten children in developing these skills. Dr. Adams touched briefly upon the idea of universal design for learning. The principles of universal design are embedded in all of our teaching, in all of our grades. We expect and ask teachers to think about and plan for all students really long before they begin to implement their lessons. We want to be sure that we're thinking about all students and what they need, and then providing access for students at a level of engagement that addresses their unique interests, their needs, their backgrounds, their prior knowledge. When we think of universal design, we also want to be sure that we are providing every student a way to engage with their curriculum, their learning that's best for them. It means providing tools for children so that they can have some choice in how they learn and what it is that they need to access the instruction. And then finally, we think about what are the ways that we allow students to show us what it is that they know? What are the ways that we can provide for flexible opportunities so students can consider their strengths, push themselves in their area of need, and have voice and choice? Really, when we think about universal design for learning, we're thinking about equity, and we're anticipating challenges or barriers in advance so that students have access and we remove those challenges and those frustrations. Finally, in Melrose, all of our services for children, we think of it as a tiered system or a layered system. We talk often about 3 layers or 3 tiers. We expect that every student is provided what we consider their first tier of the best, rich, standardized curriculum that is available to all students. And then from there, we provide much more targeted or individualized support as needed and when needed. Each student gets what he or she needs. It's not a blanket approach. On the screen, you will see a list of resources that are available for teachers to explore when they are working with students that may need something more or something different. And I say different because giving a child what they need is not necessarily more. It's just thinking about what it is that they need and making sure that we're providing that. That can look like a small group opportunity for a child. It can look rather individualized. Some of the tiers can be as straightforward as providing a child a social opportunity should they be having some difficulty, perhaps making some friends, or they may be new to the district, and a teacher's tailoring a social opportunity for them. It could be a student needs a different way of practicing a skill, and so a teacher is going to provide at the classroom level a different mode of practicing that was not part of the original first tier of instruction. We are always working with our educators to be sure that they have the resources that they need to target and individualize instruction. And of course, as we increase the target and the individualized instruction, the tier becomes more specialized and perhaps more complex and designed for individual learners.
English language learner services in the Melrose Public Schools involve ESL teachers that push into the classrooms to provide additional support. They focus on the skills of reading, writing, listening, and speaking. They provide support right in the classroom and at times also pull out students. All of our teachers in the schools are SEI endorsed, which means that they've gone through specific training in order to meet the needs of our English language learners. At this time, we have programs located at the Hoover, the Lincoln, and the Roosevelt. We identify students through the kindergarten registration process and do some screening in order to help identify students who might benefit from ESL services. If a family chooses to place their child in another school that does not have ESL services, we then just inform the parent that they will not be receiving services at those other schools and ask the parent to just acknowledge that. But our goal is in the ESL program to provide as much instruction as we can, additional supports to accelerate the English language learning process.
Special education services. All of our elementary schools provide special education services for any student who is identified with a learning disability and requires special services through an individualized education plan that is offered at every one of our elementary schools. At the Franklin and at the Roosevelt School, we also have a specialized program for students with autism disorder and the autism spectrum disorder. And they provide a little bit more service, and we give specialized treatment and services for those students. A typical day in a kindergartner's life. They are moving up from preschool and into kindergarten, but there is a great deal of movement, a great deal of activity, and learning is very much a social environment for students. And we focus on that and want students to learn from their teacher, but from each other, from interaction, and from authentic engagement. The students arrive each morning, and every teacher has established a classroom routine of attendance and lunch count and putting away our personal effects and getting ourselves ready for the day. Next, we move into our very important literacy block. This literacy block includes whole group instruction, small group instruction, peer work, and work with our classroom teacher. It includes reading literacy, following along, reading words, understanding sounds, and letters. We immediately then move into a movement break and a snack. The movement breaks may be outside, weather permitting, and with that, or if the weather is not permitting, we are still doing movement breaks and having our social snacks in the classroom. Once children finish that little movement break, we get together and start a writer's workshop. This is when we get students to understand telling a story, and they start by illustrating their story and then add words to their story, creating words with letters and sounds, and moving on to sentences and complete stories. Next, there's a mathematic instruction block. Our mathematics block is very similar to our literacy block, where we start off as a whole group and work together and have number talks. We talk about how numbers represent counting and represent meanings in problems, and how we can use numbers to solve problems. The students talk about these problems, make predictions of how to solve them, and also do a lot of games that help them to understand the interaction and the relationship between numbers and problems. We then move into our lunch, which also includes a recess movement. Once lunch is completed, we move into the afternoon of a combination of science and social studies, where students are reading and partaking in exploration in the areas of science and social studies through authentic text and hands-on experiments and engagement activities. Our specials, each one of our kindergarten specials, the students engage in physical education, they engage in health, art, music, digital literacy, and library media specialists. This is digital literacy is where they learn to be a proper digital citizen and understanding how social media impacts their world. Library media helps them to understand how they research, use a library, and do those discovery projects. And then we wrap up with our dismissal. You'll notice that the kindergarten classrooms in all the elementary schools start at 8:03 and end at 2:20. The exception to that is the program at the Franklin School that starts just a little bit later, 8:30 to 2:47. Thank you.
We wanted to provide you an example of a student learning progression, which is essentially the sequencing of teaching and learning. This particular example is mathematics, and it's the learning progression for how we help students progress in their counting and their beginning number sense. So you can see, starting on the left side of the continuum or the progression, we start with subitizing, which is the instantly seeing how many. Think of it as if you were playing a board game and you rolled the dice. As adults, you can instantly tell how many dots are represented on the dice, but that's not something you naturally knew how to do. You had to learn that. And that's where we start our kindergartners, getting them to visually recognize a quantity of 5 or less. Once students have learned to subitize, we work towards comparison. So can they compare which has more and which has less? And then as we move on to counting, it's both the rote procedure of counting, and it's verbal counting, but it's also object counting. And so the actual meaning that's attached to counting is developed through one-to-one correspondence. A one-to-one correspondence is being able to connect one number with an object and then counting each object with understanding. We move on to cardinality, which is being able to tell how many objects are in a set, and then understanding that the last word in the counting sequence really names the quantity for that set. And then ending with hierarchical inclusion, which is understanding that numbers are nested inside of each other and that the number grows by 1 with each count. For example, 3 is inside of 4, or that 4 is the same as 3 plus 1. We also wanted to tell you a little bit about our commitment to flexible learning environments. And we're talking about flexible learning environments. We're really talking about adapting continuously to meet the individual needs of students. A concrete example of a flexible learning environment involves, and a common example is flexible seating, and that students are given options and have choices about not only location within the classroom, but also the types of seating that's appropriately matched to a purpose and an activity. So the key word here is that it's personalized, and it's personalized for all students. You're hearing a lot about student-centered learning, and you'll see in this diagram this idea of making a shift from thinking about teaching and learning from being a very teacher-centered endeavor to being a very student-driven endeavor. So for a teacher, for a teacher-created learning environment, we really want to think about how are our students partners in our planning, how are they making choices, how are student voices represented, and essentially, we're ensuring that we have ongoing opportunities for student voice and choice, with opportunities for student reflection, self-assessment that leads to quality goal setting as part of that process.
And now we get into a little bit more in depth about what the curriculum looks like in kindergarten. And as you can see, with our 90-minute daily literacy block, that literacy is at the heart of our kindergarten curriculum. Our instruction is geared to support all levels of students in developing foundational skills and a love of reading. Whole group instruction focuses on core lessons in comprehension and vocabulary. Students are introduced to story elements such as character, setting, genre, and then engage in literature discussions where they can learn to make connections to their self, to other texts, and to the world around them. New vocabulary, also called amazing words, are introduced to students each week. Students engage with the words in a text through song and dance, through acting them out, and matching them to visuals. This multi-sensory approach to vocabulary is also utilized to teach high-frequency words, phonics, and phonemic awareness skills. Concepts that have been introduced at the whole group are reinforced during literacy centers. Students work independently or collaboratively on reading and writing tasks that relate to the skills they were taught. Students might read a text with a partner or write a response to the book that they have just read. They may choose a game from a word work center to reinforce concepts they are mastering, or design an illustration to demonstrate their understanding of a new word or skill. Small group instruction is utilized during our literacy block to target students' individual needs. Teachers bring groups of children together to work on a specific skill. During small group instruction, teachers plan and deliver lessons to meet students where they're at and challenge them to grow. The core text employed by students is the Pearson Reading Street program, which is a comprehensive English language arts program. Our commitment to literacy continues in our writing block, which we call Writer's Workshop. Kindergarten students write every single day, and they learn from day one that print carries meaning and a message, and that their kindergarten teachers are experts at decoding, understanding, and celebrating their words. Through a process called kid writing, students move along a writing continuum from single sounds or magic lines to phonetic-based spelling. As the year progresses, kindergarten writers get closer and closer to producing conventional spelling and punctuation. The Writer's Workshop block begins with a short lesson where a teacher models an element of good writing. These lessons are generally interactive and designed to provide students with scaffolds and supports to try something new. Students then move on to writing independently. At this point, the teacher circulates from student to student, providing feedback from which they can grow and improve, and celebrating their strengths. It's through this individual or group conferencing with students that teachers can meet the varied needs of the learners in their classroom. At the end of the workshop, teachers often ask students to share their writing with partners or with the class. Some of this work is published, and students are cheered as classroom authors. Inevitably, these class books are almost always the most popular in our classroom libraries.
Like literacy and writing, math is very important to the kindergarten curriculum. Students participate in a daily math block. The math workshop is structured so that students have opportunities to talk with their teacher and peers about their thinking, to write and solve problems. Math class is structured to provide students with whole group and small group instruction. In the whole group, The students participate in problem solving and discussion of a math topic as the whole class. Then students can work independently with partners or in small groups to apply those mathematical concepts. In the small group instruction, there's a focus that targets the learning. And this may be the introduction of new ideas or the reinforcement of previously taught material, depending upon the student's needs. The core text for mathematics is Pearson's Envision Math 2.0. This research-based program and its resources fully support and align with the Massachusetts mathematics curriculum frameworks. The Envision Math program balances skill development with instruction that enhances conceptual understanding through problem-based, interactive, and visual learning. The curriculum has 3 key focal points: conceptual development, interactive learning, and visual learning. Throughout the mathematics experience, there's ongoing assessment, interventions are applied as needed, and the differentiation of instruction allows for personalization and the development of students' skills where they are so that everyone continually grows. Principal Moranto told you a little bit about the specials. I'll add a bit more detail. So the students typically have an opportunity to have 40 minutes of their specials weekly. These include art, music, physical education and health, library, and digital literacy. In art, the students learn about line and shape and color, texture and form, along with basic art skills such as cutting, drawing, painting, and printmaking. In music, the students learn about beat. They learn to match pitch and to differentiate between their singing and their speaking voices. They demonstrate understanding of basic rhythmic concepts, and they learn to play various rhythm instruments. And they begin to recognize changes in the dynamics and the tempo of music. In physical education, the students are going to practice and acquire a variety of manipulative, locomotor, and non-locomotor movement skills. And they'll utilize these principles of training and conditioning and will apply the concepts of wellness to their lives. In health, the students learn about skills to promote and maintain their positive growth and development. In library, they get the lovely opportunity of being read aloud to and to borrow books from the library, and that's facilitated by the classroom teacher and parent volunteers. So if you like to volunteer, that may be something you want to think about. And in digital literacy, as Principal Moranto mentioned, it's very important that our children understand the power that these devices have so that they are responsible digital citizens and they understand what to do and how to do it. Within the city, we have many resources to support you and our students. First of all is our citywide PTO. Each school has a PTO, but we also have a citywide PTO that helps to facilitate activities between and among the schools. The ELL PAC, the English Language Learner Parent Advisory Council, and the Special Education Parent Advisory Council are also wonderful leadership opportunities, places where you can learn about English language learners and special education, where you can advocate for your child and for these programs. And lastly, there's the Bridge, and this is an opportunity for you to volunteer. And the Bridge helps to facilitate parents and others in their efforts to get involved in the schools and to support the schools. So I hope you take advantage of that. Lastly, I had to move down a page. Lastly is the Melrose Education Foundation, which is very supportive of the work that is done in schools, and they provide grants to teachers to provide for additional programming opportunities within the school.
As you can tell from all of my colleagues, kindergarten is a really exciting and busy year for our students. It is one of the most exciting. I think the kids learn so much, the families learn so much. If this is your first child going off to kindergarten, you are in for a wild ride, lots of ups and downs and many new activities, many new friendships. So what I'm going to do now is share, these are all of the slides that Brittany put together, our registrar. One of the pieces that she wanted me to share with you is that we are giving you an overview, and I'll go through the slides quickly so that you understand the process, but she is available, her contact information, and all of this information is available on the Melrose Public Schools website. So you will be able to link to those resources and understand. Most importantly, you heard about registration is that you complete the registration process within the timeline. So the first timeline you want to meet is the pre-registration, which is an online process this year. It opens on February 14th. The links are there, but you won't be able to access them until the 14th. They will open and then they will close again on February 28th. Paper copies are always available. If you don't have access to an online piece, you are able to get in touch with Brittany and she would make sure that a paper copy was available for you. The registration in person will be held March 1st through the 30th. And this is by appointment only. I know in some of the questions that families were asking, concern about having anything in person. We too are very concerned about anything outside of our COVID protocols, so that all of our COVID protocols for safety will be followed. If there is a question about that COVID protocol, again, Brittany is happy to be able to answer that. So that online, once you register, you complete the pre-registration. On the last page, they will give you some choices for when you want your registration, in-person registration appointment to take place. So you'll be able to do that online. The virtual tours, we typically would be giving you tours of our schools now, but because we are following COVID protocols and the only ones in our schools at this point are our teachers and students, we are postponing them and hopefully we'll be able to do those as soon as possible, late spring or sometime during the summer. And once the placements are made, rather than touring every school, your child, your family will be able to have a virtual tour of the school where you are assigned. There will be an opportunity before the start of the school year to welcome the students into their kindergarten classes once they are assigned at those schools. And that will happen prior to the start of school in late August. The online registration period, again, it opens on Sunday. It doesn't matter whether you're the first one in line on Sunday or the last one in line on Sunday the 28th, as long as you are within that time frame. You would log on to www.melroseschools.com and all of the information is there. When you get onto the website, this is the picture that you will see. You'll go to the main page and you'll click on the main page where it has this picture, kindergarten registration. That will take you to a second page that will give you more information. It will walk you through the process of pre-registration and all of the requirements that you need for pre-registration. This is just a screenshot of what you will see. It is basically a Google form that you're going to fill out, and it will walk you through every piece of registration that you need to answer. If a question is required, you won't be able to move on until you answer that. But we have tried it out several times, and it is ready to go. So the documents that are required for kindergarten registration, the child must be 5 years old by September 1st of this school year, so 2021. They must be a Melrose resident. One parent or guardian must attend an in-person registration session to provide the documents that I'll tell you about on the next slide. So the required documents, and these documents, this is something I would encourage you. You have about a week before registration opens up, a little more. You should go on to the Melrose Public Schools website now and click on the link that tells you what documents you will need. Because sometimes that will people will get caught off guard. They need original documents. They can't be photocopies of documents. So if you look on that website, it will walk you through what those documents are. A printed copy, once you do the pre-registration, a printed copy of your pre-registration form will be emailed to you. You do not need to print the entire registration if you've completed that, but you do want to bring that email, the printed registration form that you get in an email. If you need a paper packet and want to print it, that is available online also. And if you need to have us give you a paper packet, again, you go see Brittany and she will give it to you. Or get in touch with her. I highlighted at the bottom on this slide that the documents that are fine, there are 3 categories that you need to provide for proof of residency. There are 3 different categories, and you need to provide one in each of the categories. And I will show you those on the next slide. The documents, this is the part that sometimes will catch people off guard. They need to be original, mailed from the bill source. So most of us are doing our billing online. They won't take something that you print offline. You need to get in touch with one of the companies. Oftentimes they will take a gas bill, but you need it to be mailed to you from the gas company, not that you can print off. But again, look online, and it very clearly explains what it is that you need to do. So the next slide shows you those 3 categories. So the first category is evidence of residency, and it lists any of the documents that you can provide. The second category for occupancy, or evidence of occupancy, again, it can be a gas bill, an electric bill, a home telephone. They will not take your cell phone. So it's really specific. And again, if you're not sure about what it is, you are welcome to look at this page and then certainly ask Brittany, because you'll be bringing these pieces of evidence with you. And then one piece of evidence from category 3 is most typically is your identification. It could be a mass driver's license or a mass photo ID card, a passport, or other government issued photo ID. You are required in that in-person appointment to bring an original birth certificate. They will make a copy of it for you. It needs to have a raised seal on it, and they will give that document back to you. Again, that's something sometimes people pack those birth certificates away, and you need to be able to start now, make sure that you have that. The current physical exam, if your child has a physical coming up, bring the most recent physical exam with you, and they need to have the immunization records, and your pediatrician will be able to get that for you. But again, start collecting those documents now so that you have them. Those documents are what you would bring in person from March 1st to 31st, depending on what appointment you have. This is Brittany's direct contact information. You can email her or call her at that phone number, extension 1. She is more than happy to answer any of your questions. So we pretty much went over this, and I'll go over it again. So step 1 is the pre-registration process, again, from February 14th to the 28th. It is a pre-registration is required this year, where in the past it was not required. It is required this year. You will schedule your in-person registration appointment during that time. Once you have successfully completed the online registration, you will receive an email confirmation. The in-person registration is when you will bring the documents. It will be at the Melrose Veterans Memorial Middle School auditorium. Entrance is where you'll go, and it is in the courtyard between the high school and the middle school. We are asking that only one parent or guardian come. Children, we are encouraging you not to bring any children with you. Again, we're following safety and COVID protocols. Registrations received after March 30th will result in placement being made on, you will get placed, but it will limit necessarily your, the 3 top selections that you have made. The other piece, I know you've heard a lot this tonight about at this time, we always have kindergarten screening in March in Melrose. For the last several years, it has been at the Franklin, and it's not possible to do that at this time. If you have a child at the Franklin currently, we are gathering assessment information. They will not need to be screened, but any other child that has not been already part of the Melrose Public Schools will have an in-person screening, and that will happen in late spring and early summer. We will be in touch with you about that. So this is a copy of what the registration checklist will look like, what it is that you need to complete.
On behalf of the leadership team and the elementary principals, we are happy to welcome our new kindergarten students and families. And it is our belief that we have exciting kindergarten classrooms and wonderful teachers, where our goal is to create dynamic learning environments where we are developing readers, writers, mathematicians, scientists, and explorers, and playful learning environments. So I think we're going to try to answer some questions, Dr. Kuchenberger.
Thank you so much, all of you, for that very detailed and comprehensive presentation. We do have some questions that were pre-submitted, so I'll start with a couple of those while our viewers get ready and warmed up to ask their questions. Again, you can type those right into the comments, and they'll pop up for us to read and respond to. But first, Patty White-Lambright, I was hoping you could help us. We had several questions that were submitted about the registration process, why we're requiring in-person in the middle of a pandemic, and some other just specific details. Could you give us an overview about what that in-person registration will look like?
Absolutely. And I certainly appreciate people taking the time to provide us with some questions and ahead of time. And one of the questions talked about a person's previous experience with in-person registration. So I know that in the audience, we have some families that have done registration in the past. This isn't their first time. And for some of you, this will be your first time. So you really don't have that prior experience to pull upon. But for those of you who have experienced in-person registration in the past, it will be very different. One of the questions had mentioned that in the past, their experience, the line was out the door and they waited for 2 hours. That it will not be the case. We will be doing the in-person very differently. So let me kind of walk you through this. And again, the reason, the why behind why are we doing even part of registration in person, it really is to verify those important documents. So currently we are doing, if a family moves into Melrose, we have been doing in-person registration with new families coming in by appointment. And so we have worked on really a system that we feel provides for safety. So for this portion, remember, it's going to be from March 1st through March 30th. And instead of having that really long line, it will be by appointment. Each appointment will be scheduled for 20 minutes. The actual appointments will happen at the middle school. We'll have signs directing you, but it's a side door to the middle school in the courtyard between the high school and middle school, but we'll have signs so you'll be able to get in there. You'll come with your documents. The only person who will be there will be Brittany, which I'm sure everyone's dying to meet because we've only said her name, 100 times. But it will be Brittany. She'll be wearing a mask. We're going to be asking you to wear a mask. We will have a plexiglass partition between you. You will go through the documentation. She'll need to make a couple of copies, ask any questions. Hopefully we'll have things ready for you. You'll come in, you'll come out. You will not engage with any students. The way we'll have it set up, you won't be crossing paths with any middle school students. You will be the only person there with Brittany. Your appointment will end. We're scheduling enough time so that Brittany will have an opportunity to disinfect any of the area prior to the next appointment coming in. So I think this will be a very different way of doing it than anything that you've experienced in the past if you've participated before. There was one question, though, I did want to specify kind of in that registration piece. Somebody had asked a question about how is in-person registration requirement going to work if a family is in quarantine at that time? So I think it's just a good question in that should a situation like that arise during this process, you just need to reach out and communicate with us. We will absolutely work with families to make the kindergarten process work. We recognize that this is different and unusual, but we also at the same time need to gather this information so we can make thoughtful decisions and move forward for a successful kindergarten year for next year. So I think that was kind of, the whole piece there.
That covered several of the questions that were submitted in advance. Thank you for that. And, sadly, the good news is we're getting really good at all these safety protocols because we live it every day. So I'm confident that the process will be efficient and safe. Principal Rasso, we have a question for you. Do children that were at Franklin last year but chose not to participate due to COVID this year require kindergarten testing? We want to hear all about what you're saying, so please unmute.
Sorry. They will need to go through the registration process again, and they would need to be assessed again through the regular screening appointment.
And that's really just so that we make sure we're giving them the best fit placement. Is that correct? Okay, some other folks are wondering, when will the BB school decision be made and how will that impact the kindergarten selection process? So when you register, you're still going to give us your 3 preferences. You'll notice that BB is not a choice. It's just the 6 schools that are currently up and running. Once we have enrollment projections, once we see pre-registration and we start to place students, that's really going to help us assess. And then it really is, one of these answers not everybody likes, but it's going to depend. It's going to depend on what we know, kind of how the virus is behaving. One of the things we're watching really closely are these new strands of virus, whether or not the vaccination schedule will pick up speed, much like we've been promised. So there's just so many moving factors. Those are just a few, but we are committed to, starting that conversation as soon as we find it necessary. So right now, you all are playing a huge part of that, which is, giving us your pre-registration information as soon as you can once that window opens up. That's really going to help us make more informed decisions. So the next question is, and maybe Mary Beth, you could take this one. If I decide to delay kindergarten this year due to a summer birthday, do I still need to enroll and complete the registration process?
Sure. My recommendation, unless you've made your decision absolutely firm right now, is to follow through with the registration process, because you definitely want to be actively enrolled, and you don't want to be having made that decision and then the deadlines have passed. So it would be my recommendation to continue with this process. We also want to think about students and moving through kindergarten into first grade and second grade. As soon as your child is of age to begin the elementary program, we highly recommend that you consider that for your decision. All students are met where they are and provided the education that they need to accelerate through our program. So I think it's very important that you consider keeping your child with age peers that are entering the program at similar times. I hope that was helpful.
Great, thank you so much. There's one question about the first day of school. When will that be announced? Actually, this Tuesday, February 9th, the school committee is going to have a first reading of the calendar. They may choose to vote on the calendar at that time, but right now we are planning to present September 1st as the first day of school next year. That gives 2 days of professional development for our staff, and then Wednesday, September 1st would be the first day. But that'll be final. That'll be approved by school committee next week, hopefully. Okay, will children, I'm not sure who wants to take this one, but will children who are currently enrolled at the Franklin with siblings in other elementary schools be given the same consideration for placement at the sibling school rather than staying at Franklin? So I'm assuming that means a preschool student who's enrolled at the Franklin. Are they automatically staying at Franklin for kindergarten, or do they get assigned to the same school as their sibling?
If they choose to be at the Franklin, if their preference is Franklin, that would be taking into consideration, but they should make their preferences. Having a preschool student at the Franklin will not impact necessarily where they're going as a kindergarten student.
Okay, thank you, Principal Rosso. Patty, can you talk a little bit about before school hours? Will we be offering any before school care next year?
So at this moment in time, as Dr. Kuchenberger said, we might be using that phrase. At this moment in time, we are not planning on providing before school support. We will be providing after school support through education stations, but at this moment in time, again, trying to think about risk mitigation, we would not be offering before school support.
Okay, Dr. Adams, this question is for you. I have twins that I'd like in the same kindergarten class. Do I need to do anything special during registration to ensure that this can happen? Talk a little bit about how we place twins.
What I'd recommend a family does, and what we've done in the past, is you register your child, and then once they're placed in a school, have a conversation with the principal about the needs of your child and what you prefer for placement, and the principal will walk through the rationale. And so that's the best course of action, is to register, go through the process, and then talk to the building principal once you're placed in a school.
And Patty, another question about before and after care. Can you explain where Education Stations is located? We have a member of our audience who's new to Melrose and is just wondering, is it at the school that their child goes to, or is it somewhere else?
Okay, great question. So Education Station is at each of the elementary schools. So students who participate in that program don't need to go anywhere else. If they go to the Lincoln School, they participate in the Education Station program at the Lincoln School. If they're at Hoover, they stay at their school and go to after-school programming right in their building. That's one of the pluses of how we designed the program, so that kids don't have another large transition to some centralized location.
Okay, I'm just trying to suss out what's a question and what's a conversation here. One question that we have from a community member is, did the registration email go out yet? Principal Rasso, can you talk about where people will find the registration information and when that will be disseminated?
Sure. The registration information is on, if you go to the Melrose Public Schools homepage, you'll see that big yellow pencil that I showed you earlier in the slide. You click on that and that will take you to the registration page. Make sure you scroll all the way down. There are several live links there that will bring you to other documents that explain the process. You will not find a live link yet until the 14th. You may see something there that says click on it. It won't be live until the 14th.
Thank you for that. And Principal Rasso, while we have your mic on, there's a question about students who are in the Franklin Pre-K and K and how first grade works. Seeing as we just had that presentation last night, could you share with families how we handle that process?
Sure. So if a family chooses to be at Franklin for kindergarten, then about this time of year, we did it last night, we will have an open house and information process to share with you what it will be like, that transition for you. You will not need to register again, but you will need to make your give us your priorities of the 5 elementary schools, and then you will be placed in one of those 5 elementary schools. And it is a very similar process to what families are going through now.
Great. And some of the questions that were submitted in advance were about submitting registration paperwork and how that will work. So hopefully folks understand that you're going to have a registration appointment where you're going to bring that paperwork. I did also see the question in the comments about being able to just drop your paperwork off. If you need some sort of accommodation, if you're not comfortable with the appointment model, please just email Brittany and she'll be able to talk to you individually about what you need. And that's also true if you have individual or specific questions about your individual child. Brittany's going to be a great resource for you. And if she doesn't have the answer, she'll point you in the right direction. So we're happy to be as accommodating as we can with folks so that you can, have an appointment or have a process that works for your family. Our biggest thing is we want to make sure we get all of these kindergartners registered so we can start planning for them. So Principal Rasso, what happens if a child turns 5 in May and has their next physical scheduled for May 2021? Do they need to change the date of the physical to provide the last one from May 2020? Or is it just the most recent document? How does the physical piece work?
So they'll bring their do not change your physical appointment. I know they're hard to get right now. So you want to keep your physical appointment, bring your most recent document that indicates that they've had a physical within the last year, and bring the immunization record is the most important. There are immunizations that are required to enter kindergarten. Once you have had your physical in that May, June timeframe, you can mail it to the registration location at central administration before the files get kind of spread to the elementary schools. They will take it and put that new physical in the packet.
Great, thank you for that. Some other folks are wondering about how they schedule their appointment. That will be on the last page of the pre-registration form. You'll be able to select a date and time right within that form when you begin to pre-register on February 14th or after. One question is about kindergarten screenings. They will be done by appointment this year. We did say earlier that we would like one parent to come. One family is asking if they have twins, can both parents come? What do you think about that, Patty?
I think that would be fine. If you have twins and two parents, I think that works.
One parent per child.
And what I heard from Brittany with the registration, you would have one separate appointment for each child too. The same will be true with the screening. They may be back to back, but they will be separate. So it makes sense to bring two adults.
Great. So we are committed to notifying you of your school placements as soon as possible. It's hard to give you a hard date right at this time. Excuse me. Good night, Mama. Okay, good job. Sorry about that. So you'll be notified of your child's placement as soon as we are confident that we can share that information. But again, we ask you to be patient with the process because we have so many moving parts this year, even more than in a typical year. But we'll want to, make sure that when we're sharing that information, we're confident that that's the school that your child will be at, because we know you'll be really excited to share that with your child and they'll want to start thinking about which school is going to be their kindergarten placement. They might even want to go and explore the playground or take a walk around the school. And we would really not want to disappoint you or your child if adjustments have to be made. So as soon as we are confident, we will share those placements with you. We're not sure next year if we will still have a need for a Melrose Distance Learning Academy. Some folks are asking if that will be available for kindergarten students if the pandemic is still uncontrolled. So that's one of those things that's kind of still in motion. Particularly, this family is asking if they have an older sibling who's in MDLA. Will the younger sibling registering for K be affected in trying to get a slot at home school or MDLA schooling with their siblings? So again, let's just get pre-registered. That's the first step. We'll focus on that in this moment, and then some of these other things will continue to unfold. We've made no decisions at this time on whether or not we'll have a Melrose Distance Learning Academy, also known as MDLA, in the 2021-2022 school year. But as soon as we make those decisions, we'll be sharing that information widely, not wildly, maybe both. Another question is, and maybe I would ask Dr. Tracy if you'd like to answer this one for us. Is it possible to keep a kindergarten eligible student home and then send them directly into first grade the following year, particularly if COVID is still an issue? But could you talk a little bit about our views around the importance of kindergarten?
We certainly think it provides a critical foundation, and the program that we're offering is comprehensive. We can certainly respect that each family needs to make the choice that's right for them. One thing we're very careful about, cautioning families around this idea of retaining students. There's a tremendous amount of research about retention not having a lot of positive benefits, and any of the positive benefits are very short-lived. So, I mean, if families decide to hold back and enter in first grade, I believe that's an option. And we certainly, understand that people are making careful, cautious decisions, but we do know that a lot of the foundational elements of the kindergarten program, there would be concern about what gaps would be present and how much kind of intervention and catching up a first grader would have to do in order to be at grade level and hitting those important benchmarks throughout the year. So, would we advise it? You're making decisions that could create some substantial gaps in the student's development. So it would have to be something that you would need to think very carefully about, and I would recommend having conversations with some of the educators here on the screen before you really made that decision final.
Thank you for that, Dr. Tracy. Principal St. George, can you talk a little bit about what's the difference between each school? We talked about a lot about what's the same, but what's different?
Sure. We're always careful when we answer that question. We all are very passionate about our schools and are really jazzed up about our schools and think they're great. And they are all great. I think some of the differences, the size of a school certainly can feel different, but we really all in general have the same programming. We do have, I think, perhaps a culture or a climate that is not different in a substantial way, but different more in terms of who's our mascot. What are our core values? What's the frame of our core values? We all have core values. We all work under the positive behavior intervention system, the PBIS system. We all explicitly teach what our values are and what those, how children meet those expectations throughout the day. At Lincoln, we're the lion, so our mascot's a lion, and everything we do sort of rhymes or fits in with a lion or a paw print. But Dr. Tracy's a wildcat. I think he has a paw print also. So those are some differences, and using those differences is how we start to frame a sense of community. So we have spirit days and a lot of really fun community building days at every school. And we use those days to really build an identity within our school. And that looks different and may have a slightly different feel to it. We all have very active parent groups, and they may provide some enrichment or clubs or in-school extensions to the learning, whether it's providing us with some Museum of Science resources or some music opportunities. And certainly that's perhaps unique to each school, but we all have those aspects of the school day and aspects to the school year that certainly have their own specific flavor to it. But I think those are important aspects of school and how we celebrate who we are as a community. But they're not differences that really set us apart. How you celebrate and enrich a child's day or celebrate a special month in the year does not cause a different outcome when you come to the end of a school year in terms of what a child has learned or what they're able to do. But those differences help them connect to their community, their neighbors, their teachers, and the folks that really surround the individual school. I don't know if that's helpful because it's sort of a non-answer answer, because the ways that we are similar are really critical in what we believe as a Melrose Public Schools. But how we celebrate and have fun together is perhaps unique.
Thank you for that. Each school does have its own unique culture and climate based on the people and the children who are there. Principal Churchill, can you help us understand what does the average kindergarten class size look like, maybe school to school or across the city? And do you know how many kindergarten classes we had in the district last year?
Sure. I would tell you in a typical year, the average kindergarten class size ranges from about 22 to 24. Each of our buildings has between 2 and I believe now at the Franklin 4 kindergarten classrooms. So the Winthrop School has 3 kindergarten classrooms. The Roosevelt has 3. The Lincoln has 3. Hoover has 2. Horace Mann has 2. And Franklin is now up to 4. So it varies. But we try to keep an equitable number of students across the district so that you won't see any classes with really high numbers or low numbers.
And that's been a real challenge this year because some students chose MDLA, so balancing the hybrid cohorts has been a little trickier than in normal years. Thank you for that. In terms of how many we're anticipating at this time, it's really going to depend on pre-registration. We know that there were about 50 students who were registered for kindergarten in the beginning of, the end of the summer, the start of the school year. Some families moved away, others family chose other options for their kindergarten experience, but we were down about 50 kindergarten students then from what we were anticipating. We fully anticipate that this year, those numbers will rise up to their kind of typical levels. But again, that's what's going to help us. Once we have this pre-registration data, that will help us make those decisions and begin planning based on available space, building to building. Some other questions are just about next year. And again, this is hard for us because we wish we had more information to give. Is there a plan to have kindergarten be full-time next year? What I can say, and my colleagues can be free to join into the conversation, is that we are actively thinking about ways to increase access to in-person learning for our current kindergartners. We know how important that daily support and weekly support is for our youngest learners. As Dr. Tracy mentioned earlier, we believe deeply that kindergarten is an essential foundation for student success, not just in first grade, but in life. There's this saying that everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. And as a former kindergarten teacher, I'd say that is absolutely true. So we are doing everything we can to get those learners in full time. I know that everyone here is going to be advocating for our kindergarten learners to be in full time next year, not just our kindergarten learners, but all of our learners. So that's part of our plan. We're not just waiting for next year, though. We're actively trying to think of some different strategies and ways we can make that happen this academic year as well. Just scanning through the chat really quickly to see if there's any that I missed. So here's a great question. Christopher's asking about cultural diversity and what types of enrichment exists to ensure that students feel safe and accepted. So Dr. Adams, do you want to talk a little bit about our district-wide work around diversity, equity, and inclusion? And then individual principals, please feel free to join in the conversation and speak about your individual schools.
The Melrose Public Schools has really worked hard in the last 9 months to really tackle and move forward our goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion. This past year, we have a team of district stakeholders, student, parents, school committee, and teachers who are working together to develop some goals for the district around diversity and equity. And we're excited about that work and moving that forward. We've been working with teachers to think about how do we make sure that our curriculum is representative of all of our students, as well as the wider diversity in our community and in our nation. And we've been working all year to create materials for teachers to integrate into their classrooms. And we're excited as we go back to quote unquote a normal kind of school day in school to continue to incorporating those pieces into classrooms and into all of our classrooms. We've also been working with teachers in training and really thinking about the role of bias in our classrooms and microaggressions, and that's ongoing work. We know that we need to continue as a district, but as a leadership team and our educators are committed to moving forward in our goals around equity and inclusion, and we're excited and continue to work to revise our curriculum to be more inclusive.
So much really important work going on. Dr. Adams, while your mic is on, we have a question from a family who moved to the US about 1.5 years ago, and they're wondering how could language as a sole factor affect or limit which schools they choose? So assuming this is English as a second language kind of question.
Any student who may be identified as an English language learner is screened in order to determine what if they would qualify for services. If they do qualify, we would recommend to the family that we have programs at the Hoover, the Lincoln, and the Roosevelt. We would say those are where we have programs. If a family's first choice is not one of those schools, we would honor the parent's choice, but just advise them that at another school they would not receive services at that school.
Great, thank you for that. Just a comment, one parent says that they are so appreciative to learn how much thought you are putting into this, and thanks all of you for your hard work and efforts. Thank you for that, Rachel. We appreciate you. Just scrolling through to make sure we covered everything. I think generally we talked about most of the questions that I see here. One last question I think we touched on, but just again, Patty, if you could remind us, what happens if I don't get my first choice? What's the process to petition the placement?
So we do have, if you don't get your first preference for a school, you are automatically placed on a waiting list by Brittany. And we maintain that waiting list through November 1st. So we do find that there is some movement as families, something changes in their lives and they were planning on coming to kindergarten and they end up moving to another community. So sometimes their slots open up and we go to that waiting list to see if that person is interested in making a change even up through November 1st. In addition, if families have a particular hardship that we might not be specifically aware of, then they are able to write a letter to you, Dr. Kuchenberger, to explain that. And we put together a panel of individuals, including principals, a school psychologist, and we'll look at that information and also consider particular hardship.
Great, thank you for that.
Can I, there was another question I thought I could respond to. There was somebody asked a question, I think, about education stations in regards to early release or vacation weeks for next year. So currently we are not providing options for students only participating in early release days or providing something on vacation weeks. For next school year, if a student is coming to education stations and they're there on Wednesdays, I'm assuming we will continue to have our early release dates on Wednesdays. If students are registered for education stations, they will be able to, we will start education stations early on early release day, but we will not be offering the option where parents can only sign up for early release days. Because again, that would be bringing many different kind of students together. So at this point, we're not planning on offering that as an option.
Thank you, that's helpful. There was a couple kind of like that. And just while you're talking about education stations, one family's wondering if there are options for that after school program education stations at every elementary school, and can they keep friends together in those programs?
Well, so again, it's at every building, and I'm not sure if we would be keeping that. I can commit to keeping friends together. Again, it would be based on if that friend happened to be in the same classroom, then there would be a very good likelihood that they would be kept together. But we will certainly know more the closer we get to the start of school. A lot of those kind of specific details will be worked out once we understand what are the circumstances and safety protocols from the state that we will be required to implement.
Thank you for that. And I see someone reminded me about the vaccination questions. So as of right now, vaccinations, COVID-19 vaccines are not required for students or staff. That's the information we have. Some of our staff have been eligible in the first phase due to their certifications, mostly clinicians like speech therapists, occupational therapists, school nurses have been able to access the vaccine in phase 1. We're eagerly awaiting for the rest of our staff to have access to the COVID-19 vaccine, but it is not something that is mandated at this time. For students or staff, I should add. Is vaccination requirements, district can make a call or just refer to the state guidance? So we will follow the state guidance on that. That's not something that typically school districts make locally. It is, you know, if it's required, much like the flu shot this year, right? This was the first time the flu shot was required. It was required up until December 31st. And then it said that the guidance changed and families had till February. And then they said, oh, never mind, it's no longer required. So again, we follow that guidance. We reinforce that messaging, but we don't make our own plan when it comes to vaccinations. Okay. Any final thoughts from our panelists? Anything you'd like to add or say to our families before we wrap up? Just noticing the time, it's about 8:30. Okay. Well, thank you so much to all of the families who joined us tonight. This isn't your only opportunity. You have access to the presentation. You can come back and rewatch and rewind and fast forward to parts that you'd like to reinforce. You also have the slides. Thank you, Melanie Acevedo. She is our backstage helper, making this all run smoothly. You have the slide deck there. It'll all be posted on our website, and you'll be getting communication soon, and we'll be posting soon on the website the pre-registration process. Thank you all for being here. Take care and be well.